Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. 4 days left to go until we get rid of Donald Trump, but it's going to be dependent upon our hard work for the next 4 days. These things do not happen by accident. We thought Hillary had it won with 4 days left to go. We thought Al Gore had it won with 4 days left to go. And in fact, they did have more popular votes, but they didn't win. So let's just not trust the polls. The polls were actually accurate with Gore and with Hillary. They did have more votes, but they didn't win the Electoral College. So we have a lot of work still to be done. We'll celebrate on Tuesday night or Wednesday or Thursday or whenever we get the final result, but we have to do the work. And tonight we're going to have a fabulous discussion with three incredible leaders about justice, about our justice system, about our court system, about all of the things that are going to have to happen in the wake of the Republicans pushing through Amy Coney Barrett on short notice in violation of the Republicans' pledge that they would not nominate and confirm a justice during the last year of a presidential term, on top of their successful efforts 4 years ago to deny Barack Obama his ability to be able to nominate and confirm Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court. So there's two seats that are now in Republican control. They have a 6-3 majority in the Supreme Court. And as we know, the Affordable Care Act is going to be heard beginning on November 10th in the Supreme Court. And Amy Coney Barrett will be sitting there. And there'll be a 6-3 conservative majority. And on top of that, Roe versus Wade, environmental laws, civil liberties, everything that we've put on the books over the last couple of generations, it's now all in jeopardy. And from my perspective, I think that it's absolutely imperative that we do away with the filibuster rule and begin the discussion of the expansion of the Supreme Court. I just think that we have to do that. Otherwise, we're going to have embedded a 6-3 conservative majority on the Supreme Court to be ruling on law after law, women's rights, gun safety protections, civil rights, environmental protections, LGBTQ protections. It's endless, the kinds of challenges which they're going to be able to make and ultimately raise up through the Supreme Court of the United States of America. And so tonight, we're going to have just a fabulous discussion. We have with us Mondaire Jones. Mondaire is, he's the next congressman from the state of New York. He's going to be a big star. He already is, but he's going to have a larger platform that he's going to be able to use in order to raise the voice of all those who are thirsting for justice in our country. And it's just so great to have him with us. Chris Kang is with us. He's the co-founder of Demand Justice, this cutting edge movement organization that has absolutely helped to transform the politics in our country over the last 2 or 3 years. And Shante Davis, a youth activist with the Sunrise Movement. This incredible group of young people who over the last couple of years have transformed the debate on climate change in our country, on high school, college campuses. It's just been transformative. It's injected itself into the politics of our country, and we are moving rapidly towards that they will be able to cash in next year because of all the work which they did to advance the goal of climate justice, environmental justice in our country. So maybe we can begin with you, Chris Kang. Can you talk a little bit about how threatening this heist of 2 Supreme Court seats is to the protections of the lives of ordinary families in our country?
Absolutely, and thanks so much for having me. I think that is exactly the right frame. We're talking about the heist of the Supreme Court. We're talking about the heist of our democracy. We're talking about, we're on the cusp now of Democratic presidential candidates winning 7 of the last 8 presidential elections on the popular vote. And yet we've had Republicans on the majority of the Supreme Court for the past 50 years and are poised to lock in this ultra extreme Trump supermajority for the next 30 years. And it's all because Republicans have this plan. Republicans are using our courts to accomplish things they could never do through Congress. They could never do through the White House. You look, we already talked about it, the Affordable Care Act. We all remember John McCain's thumbs down moment. The Affordable Care Act was saved, except they're back in court again, trying to strike it down with Amy Coney Barrett. You look at overturning Roe versus Wade. You look at stopping gun violence prevention. You look at stopping the ability to address climate change. These are like 80-20 issues. 80% of the American people demand change. They demand progress. And yet Republicans are using our Supreme Court to impose the will of the 20% on the rest of us. And that's really what we're looking at. We're looking at a threat to our democracy. We're looking at a threat to representation. And we really do, like, we talk about a lot, we'll talk today a lot about what's at stake from a substantive perspective. But this is not, from my perspective, from demand justice's perspective, we don't just want to add seats to the Supreme Court because we have to wrest control of the court because we want to see it sort of have our policy outcomes and just to uphold our laws. This is about restoring the balance before the theft. Somebody steals something from you, there has to be consequences. I think one of the reasons we're in the situation we're in now is they stole the seat from President Obama. They changed the Senate rules to force through Merrick Garland. And if we're honest, there weren't, or to force through Neil Gorsuch. And if we're honest, there weren't enough consequences. There weren't enough consequences from that theft, which allowed them to force through Brett Kavanaugh in a sham confirmation hearing and embolden them to rush through Amy Coney Barrett when 60 million Americans had already voted. We're in the middle of an election. And so there have to be consequences. We have to restore balance. And that's the only way we're going to restore legitimacy to our court.
So Mondaire, what's at stake with Amy Coney Barrett on the Supreme Court? You know, what I've been saying is you can have the ACA or you can have ACB, but you can't have both. You can't have the Affordable Care Act and Amy Coney Barrett. You have to choose one or the other. And that's just one issue. Can you talk a little bit about, you know, what is at stake?
A lot, Senator, and thank you for putting together this incredible event, because more people need to be talking about the threat that the 6-3 conservative majority on the Supreme Court now poses to democracy itself, which is something that I have been spending a lot of time thinking about. You know, this is a Supreme Court that in a 5-4 decision gutted the crown jewel of the civil rights movement, the Voting Rights Act, in that 2013 Shelby decision. And if you believe that Justice Roberts, Chief Justice Roberts, somehow merits or deserves his reputation for at times being a moderate on the court, then that is no longer sufficient to give you comfort on any number of issues affecting the daily lives of hundreds of millions of Americans. Because now there will still be at least 5 votes on that court to strike down marriage equality, which is deeply personal for me as someone who is gay and as part of a community of people who has to wait every June to see whether the Supreme Court will extend rights that should have been given to us a long time ago or take away rights. You know, if you are Black and you want to exercise your right to vote, just ask the folks in Georgia and Texas and Wisconsin and South Carolina whose votes are in Florida, when we talk about felon disenfranchisement, whose votes are actively being suppressed by Republican state legislatures and statewide elected officials and Republicans in Congress, and indeed the Supreme Court as an accomplice in any number of cases just this year. So there is quite a bit at stake, including just the right to exercise, the right to vote, which is how we ensure good people continue to get elected to office and staying power for the kinds of progressive legislation that we want to see enacted in the 117th Congress, which I'm really excited to be part of in just a few minutes.
Thank you, Mondaire. So Shante, what's at stake for communities of color, for marginalized communities in our society with the elevation of Amy Coney Barrett?
So we already see the effects of Trump's Supreme Court right now. Like right now, I live in Houston. If I drive into Pasadena, you can, it's over there by the ship channel, and like the pollution, you can just see, you know, the effects of climate change. They have a bunch of industries over there, and they go over, you know, they don't abide by the policies for the Clean Air Act. So we see a lot of those right now. And then on top of that, a lot of these, you know, communities of color, they rely on like acts such as the Affordable Care Act, and they end up experiencing the effects of health inequity. So like, you know, untreated asthma. And so no matter who is elected, communities of color risk a number of issues, such as like advances in police reform, environmental policies, healthcare acts, and civil rights will be difficult to pursue.
Thank you. So, so Chris, the Supreme Court has actually become a political beast. In your opinion, should we be discussing term limits in order to change the overall personality composition of the Supreme Court?
So I think there are a lot of different problems with the court and a lot of different potential solutions. To me, it all starts with adding seats to the Supreme Court. I think we should talk about expanding the seats, and then what can we do afterwards, right? What are we going to pair adding seats with? And I do think the term limits is a very serious thing that we should consider. I think one of the things that we talk about, one of the reasons why the stakes are so high is because you never know when there's going to be a vacancy on the Supreme Court, or because justices like Anthony Kennedy rig the timing of their retirement so they can be replaced by President Trump. And so if you created a system, and one of the term limit proposals out there is to allow every single president to appoint a justice in her or his first year and third year, everybody gets 2 justices. The stakes are a little bit lower, the politics are a little bit taken out of it, and then we don't have to keep adding seats. Sort of once we restore balance, the next time you don't have to worry about the next president adding seats. The next president just has to win an election, and then she or he will be able to add 2 seats themselves. And so I think that that's a very important part of the conversation. I think one of the downsides is that I think that the legislation introduced by Representative Kahana and others is constitutional. But there's a question, there's a debate about it that I think we need to sort of wrestle with as well as we consider how we would implement the term limits. But I do think that it's definitely a necessary part of any comprehensive Supreme Court reform.
You know, what's unbelievable, Mondaire, was back in 2000, by a 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court stopped the counting of the ballots in Florida that would determine whether George Bush or Al Gore became president of the United States. I was actually down there as an observer for Al Gore in Palm Beach County. And unbelievably, 3 of George Bush's lawyers in that recount are now on the Supreme Court of the United States. And Donald Trump is threatening to actually take the results of this election to the Supreme Court of the United States. And by 5-4, the Supreme Court selected George Bush in 2000. Can you tell me what apprehensions you have about this scenario as it is potentially unfolding?
I am deeply concerned by that, and thank you for making the observation that literally 3 of the judges on this 9-person Supreme Court were counsel in the Bush v. Gore decision, and now all of a sudden we are supposed to expect. And by the way, like historians, legal scholars uniformly view the Bush v. Gore decisions as one of the worst in the entire history of the United States of America. There was simply no legal basis for what happened there. It was a partisan effort, a deeply partisan effort. And you see the president, I mean, he doesn't really hide the ball. I mean, he tells you exactly what he's trying to do, right? And we ought to take that seriously. I'm very concerned about that. And it's why it's so incumbent upon everybody to vote as early as possible, and to get their cousins and other family members to vote, and their friends, and people who they work with, to make sure that we deliver such significant margins for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris that it is really difficult to litigate the results in the days following November 3rd. I was so disappointed, to use a euphemism, to see what happened with the Eighth Circuit decision last night. Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals, for those of you who don't know, decided that in order for ballots to be for sure counted, they have to arrive by 8 p.m. on November 3rd, I think in Minnesota. And then anything that arrives after, they're gonna put in a separate pile, which is not comforting at all. So we have to make sure that we don't allow it to get to a point where it goes up to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, and we've got Mondaire, we've got a little bit of history here too. The famous headline was Dewey beats Truman. Harry Truman held it up, but Truman came back and won by a point. Jack Kennedy won by a quarter of a point. Richard Nixon won by a point. Jimmy Carter won by 2 points. Al Gore won by a point. No, wait, I guess he didn't. Hillary Clinton won by a point. No, maybe she didn't, but she had the popular votes to do it. So I agree with you, Mondaire. Anyone who's looking at this election, they should just look back to our recent history. Just look to Gore, look to Clinton. They won the popular vote and didn't win the Electoral College. So please vote. Please get your friends to vote. Please make sure that everyone gets out to the polls. There's a tremendous rise in the number of votes, but don't vote by mail. You get out there in person, deliver your ballot in person, and do it before 8 o'clock if you're in Minnesota or some other state. It's unbelievable, Mondaire, what they're doing.
Which we don't say lightly, right? I mean, in the midst of a pandemic, you want people to be able to rely on the Postmaster General to facilitate mail, and you want to make sure that ballots are going to be counted, even if they arrive a few days after November 3rd. But unfortunately, as we saw in that Supreme Court decision with respect to Wisconsin, where Justice Kavanaugh had 5 or more errors, factual errors, in his opinion, discarding ballots that arrive after November 3rd, that you just cannot rely on such things. It's really this dystopian reality that we're living right now. And it's why we have to, by the way, abolish the Electoral College. It should simply be a popular vote. We'll send the next president to the White House. But that's not what we have right now. We have minoritarian institutions that allow a shrinking minority of the American people to lord over us. And you see these kinds of crazy results as a consequence.
Yeah, look at there's a racist underpinning to the Electoral College that was really intended to give extra votes to southern states for the number of slaves that they had, so that there'd be more congressmen at the time who got elected, those extra seats, so then they could vote against the rights of the slaves in those states. And in fact, those extra and they allowed slaves to be counted for 3/5 of a human being towards the goal of getting the extra seats. And by the way, John Adams would have been reelected in 1800, not Thomas Jefferson, if they couldn't count all those extra Electoral College votes. So there's been an electoral, we'll call it distortion right from the very beginning. And that's why people don't understand when Amy Coney Barrett says that she's an originalist. She tries to interpret the original intent of the founding fathers. Well, we know what their original intent would have been. It would have been racist, would have been sexist, would have been anti-LGBTQ. We're supposed to figure out what those people were thinking about. I'm sorry, that's really that's a really crazy interpretation of the Supreme Court and its intent. Originalism, and that's what Amy Coney Barrett says that she's really committed to doing, and it's scary when you think about a woman's right to choose, or LGBTQ, or other communities, or the environment for that matter. I'm not sure there was a full understanding of climate science in 1787, Shantae. I will tell you the most important environmental decision of all time, it's Massachusetts versus EPA, which is a 2007, April of 2007 Supreme Court decision that was a 5-4 decision, which said to the EPA, it was Massachusetts suing, saying that the coastline of Massachusetts was eroding very rapidly because of greenhouse gases. And so they sued the EPA saying, do something about it. And the EPA said no. And so it went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled 5-4 that the EPA had to make a determination as to whether or not greenhouse gases were endangering the coast of Massachusetts. And they ordered the EPA to do so. In his dissenting opinion, in a footnote, Mondaire, Antonin Scalia, in his dissent, in his footnote, said, "What's next? Are we going to have to make a ruling on the flatulence of cows emitting methane into the atmosphere?" So that's good originalist thinking, you know. You're so right, Justice Scalia. You know, how would they be thinking of that? All a bunch of farmers back in 1787 drafting the Constitution. So can you talk a little bit, Shante, about how you view Massachusetts versus EPA and all these other historic decisions that have helped to advance the cause of environmentalism?
Yeah, definitely. So as a person who's experienced like the turmoil and disaster of both Katrina and Harvey, you know, I'm turning out the vote at Sunrise Phone Banks for Green New Deal champions, sending them to Congress who will fight for rulings such as Massachusetts versus EPA, because they are so important in, you know, preserving our climate. These are like, you know, like bare minimum steps, like the foundational for environmental policies. So yeah, I felt the fear of, you know, water bursting in your home, and you don't know if, you know, do we have to sleep with the mold, or, you know, where are we going to sleep next? So yeah, Sunrise and a whole bunch of other environmental groups are fighting like hell, using tried and true methods such as wide awakes, where we go to our politicians and elected officials' homes and keep them up and tell them to step up or step aside. If they're, you know, we know that they don't have the people's needs at their best interests. Yeah, we're also phone banking, doing relational text banks to get out the vote, especially the youth vote. And yeah, also, yeah, we have been partially responsible for like how especially like the Texas race, the demographic of the Texas race. We have been phone banking for Green New Deal champions, Julie Oliver and Mike Siegel. And we've also are rallying the youth to strike after Election Day, no matter who wins.
No, and I agree with you, Shante. We can have two new, bold, you know, progressives coming out of Texas, running on the Green New Deal to join Mondaire on the floor of the United States Congress. So reinforcements coming over the hill, you know, just injecting incredible amounts of energy into the politics of the country. And Mondaire, when you look at how do we advocate, Mondaire, for greater diversity on the courts? It's just right now the courts do not reflect America as it exists.
Yeah, I think someone just wrote about the statistic that Donald Trump has not appointed a single person of color to any of the circuit courts of appeals, or maybe it's not a single Black person, any of the courts of appeals. Chris would know better than I would on that, in the country. And, you know, I worked in the Office of Legal Policy at the Department of Justice before law school. And one of the things that I was responsible for was helping to vet nominees or rather before they became nominees, names that the White House counsel's office has sent to us. And this was an incredibly diverse array of judges, people who were of color, Black and brown, immigrants, people who were LGBTQ, including in the Southern District of New York, where I would later clerk. But there's one thing that I actually would like to make the observation we need more of, whether it's Democrat or Republican in the White House making these nominations, and that's diversity of lived experience in terms of the legal profession, right? You got too many folks who have been prosecutors and corporate lawyers and partners at these law firms. We need people who are public defenders. We need people who are immigration attorneys on the part of immigrants. We need people who are civil rights attorneys, who are coming from organizations like the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, we need more of that represented. Because those lived experiences with respect to seeing how the law impacts marginalized communities are really important in informing judicial decision-making. We are all products of our experiences, whether we like it or not. And so we need to make sure that we have diversity within the legal profession. I would also say that you shouldn't have to go to Harvard Law School like I went to, or Yale or Stanford, any of these Ivy League institutions to necessarily get a judgeship, right? We need people from all colleges and people who went to all colleges and universities and went to public law schools, because those experiences are extremely important as well.
So thank you, Mondaire. And so, Chris, Mondaire has raised these issues about the composition of the court system in America. Can you talk about the circuit court, the district court system, the federal district court system in the United States? What kind of reforms do we need in order to make them more relevant today?
So that is a great, and I do just want to follow on Mondaire's point. I ran judicial nominations for President Obama, and so I'm very proud of the diversity of his nominations. I did it for 4 years in terms of the most people of color, most women, most openly LGBT nominees in history. And look, I think we did well as we could with the rules that we were living under, in which Republicans wielded a lot of procedural difficulties in terms of getting the best and most progressive and most diverse range of experiences. But we're in a different world now. We're in a world in which Republicans have taken down a lot of the guardrails and the norms that have been in place that restricted President Obama from picking those civil rights lawyers and immigration lawyers and public defenders. And now that we're in a different world, we need a Democratic president and a Democratic Senate to push for more progressive nominees, to push for union lawyers and plaintiffs' lawyers, people who represented individuals and not just institutions, whether it's the government or corporations. Now, one of the challenges we have is that President Trump has filled all of the circuit court vacancies, and he's filled them, as Mondaire says, 53 judges, 0 Black judges, 1 Latinx judge out of 53. And so the judiciary is a lot more white and a lot more male than it's been in a generation. One of the reforms that we're advocating for, Demand Justice, is to expand the lower courts, right? We're talking about expanding the Supreme Court's. The lower courts, it used to be that Congress would routinely add seats to the lower courts as population rose, as caseloads rose, to administer justice. This is an access to justice issue. Congress has not comprehensively added lower court seats since 1990, right? The country has grown by 1/3 since then. Caseloads have grown by 1/3 since then. Judges have grown by less than 3%. We need a huge influx of new judges to increase access to justice, to restore some sense of balance of diversity to the court, both demographic diversity and experiential diversity. And then we can start talking about what justice looks like, what a judiciary looks like that really serves the American people. So that absolutely needs to be part of the conversation as we look toward reform next year.
You know, when I started at Boston College Law School, my father was a milkman. I live in the same house here. My father was the milkman, so I live in the same house here in Malden, Massachusetts. And so I was a commuter to Boston College Law School. So when I was starting in my first year of law school in 1969, the cities had exploded in 1968. You know, the war in Vietnam was at its peak. Women were up and upset about their role in society. The LGBTQ community was beginning to rise up. Stonewall, it's all happening all at the same time. And so all of a sudden at Boston College Law School, 10% of the students are Black, including, by the way, my classmate, Congressman Bobby Scott from Virginia. And there's 160 of us in the class, and 10% of women now. And 2 years before, like 2% were women and 1% was Black. And all of a sudden it's 10% and 10%. How did they find all these people in just 2 years to be able to go to law school? But they had never had an African-American law professor. And so they recruited Herbert O. Reed from Howard Law School, who had been the constitutional law professor there. to be our constitutional law professor for a year. He eventually became the dean of Howard Law School. He was Muhammad Ali's lawyer. He was Adam Clayton Powell's lawyer to get him reseated after he was booted out. As Professor Reed would say to us, isn't it interesting, 200 years of a Congress, and finally they decide to boot someone out for doing something wrong, and it's a black guy who's the chairman of a committee. So he got him reseated, Adam Clayton Powell, and he was Muhammad Ali's lawyer. He was the Chicago 7. He was on the Chicago 7 team, all in my first year at in law school. So finally, one of these young men whose father was a lawyer, and that's like half the class, you know, not me. I don't even know which side of the courtroom to sit on. I have no idea what we're talking about here. I've just always said I wanted to be a lawyer, to be like Atticus Finch. It turns out there aren't many law practices built around Atticus Finch. And so but I was going to be a lawyer. I was going to be Atticus Finch. So I decided to run for office and try to do good that way. Turned out on the first page, by the way, of To Kill a Mockingbird, he not only is the lawyer in town, he's also the state representative up in the Capitol. So I decided to take that part of Atticus Finch, to be up in the Capitol. So in my third year of law school, I ran for state representative and I won. And so one of the young men, after about a month of Professor Herbert O. Reed talking, and he was on Brown versus Board of Education. He's the third name on Brown versus Board of Education after Thurgood Marshall. So one of the students said, what is the definition of standing? You've been talking about it for a month, Professor. And so he's just stepped back and he looked at him and he said, well, young man, you and every other white male in this class, you were born with standing. Your job is to get standing for everyone who's not a white male in this class and every other American. That's your job for your careers. And it's 1969, he said. We've come a long way since 1787. And that was the most important sentence I heard in law school. It was just such a clean, clear cut to the heart of the whole history of the courts in our country. So that's the discussion we're having right now, right? Do we really have a justice system that reflects the country that we are living in right now? Because as he said to the class, he said, you have standing when the judge says you have standing. That's the definition. And you have to change how people view all these cases. But you need a court system that's going to hear those cases, that's going to be fair as plaintiffs come before the court to make their case as to why the law should be interpreted in a different way. And that's my great fear, that we've reached a point where the most conservative elements in our country have found a way to say, no, you can't change any longer. We're going to just keep the laws the way they are and roll back many of them to an earlier interpretation. And when we say, Chris, when we say, well, let's expand the court, they say, well, you can't do that. That breaks with tradition. But of course, we know Mitch McConnell was perfectly content for one full year to have an 8-member Supreme Court. He wouldn't even give a hearing to Merrick Allen. So it was 8 for a year, but it didn't bother him then. Didn't seem so important to him to have 9, you know, if it was 9 that didn't reflect who they were. So we have a big decision to make next year. Mondaire and I will be in the Congress. You know, we'll be there with this real challenge to that critical part of our democracy. And so I guess what I would ask each one of you, we'll start with you, Shantae, and then come back through Mondaire and to you, Christopher. Maybe you could each give us your view as to how you want these many people, these thousands of people watching right now, how you want them to view this critical issue of the courts in the United States.
Yes. Right now, I want the people viewing this to view SCOTUS as illegitimate in today's society. You have to think about it like this: since we don't have any term limits, and people can serve, you know, until life. The idea of justice will vary depending on like the generation and the experiences of these people. So, just for instance, you know, they're coming from Jim Crow time. justice may just look like, being racists being able to sit at the same table versus now, like everyone should be able to coexist. We should all have health care. We should all be able to drink clean water, have housing. No one should be left behind. And SCOTUS is infringing on our right to democracy.
Thank you, Shantae. Mondaire.
I want people to think about all the nice things that they want to get done in 2021, and to view the Supreme Court of the United States as being a major roadblock to those things, whether that is Medicare for all or a public option, because this is a Supreme Court that's going to strike down the Affordable Care Act, whether that is marriage equality that we want to preserve, or protections for the LGBTQ plus community and our federal anti-discrimination law, perhaps in the form of the Equality Act, which I hope will get passed in the first, few days of the 117th Congress. Maybe it's, and in fact, it is definitely Roe v. Wade and other efforts to protect reproductive justice for women. It is the Voting Rights Act. In fact, it's the John Lewis Voting Rights Act that we want to see passed since the original Voting Rights Act was gutted by the Supreme Court in that Shelby decision. And so these things and more, including, not least of which, environmental regulations, whether it is a Green New Deal or the really impressive climate proposal that Joe Biden has put together and offered for public consumption. And we know that historically this conservative Supreme Court has been hostile to environmental regulations, and that many of them do not believe in climate change, which is unconscionable in 2020. And so all of those nice things that we want to get passed, including more modest things offered by Joe Biden on the campaign trail, are in peril. So it must be viewed, a court expansion, as a prerequisite to govern effectively and to build back better, in the words of Joe Biden, or to undertake the kind of reconstruction that I like to say we need to do in 2021.
Thank you, Mondaire. Chris.
So what I would say is sort of the reason why we started Demand Justice a few years ago. Everybody knows Tuesday is the biggest day for democracy. The White House is on the line. This House is on the line. We have a chance to flip the Senate. Don't forget, there's a third branch of government that underpins it all. So whatever it is, getting you to the ballot box, or hopefully you've already voted or you've made a plan and you're going to vote before Tuesday, certainly get your ballot in before the deadline, because the Supreme Court may try to take it away if it's postmarked and doesn't come in time. But whatever it is, the Supreme Court has the final word. Reproductive justice, criminal justice, police reform, LGBTQ equality, immigrant right, white supremacy, climate change, gun violence prevention. I could go on and on. Whatever it is, this Supreme Court is going to have the final word. We have to remember that we have to fight for justice and equality in all three branches of government. And right now, this third branch of government has been stolen from us. It is illegitimate and it needs to be reformed. But what I'll also say is that while a lot of us are really appalled and outraged by this Republican Senate ramming through this nomination of Ruth Bader Ginsburg's successor while 60 million votes have been cast, this is a moment of hope. This is a moment of opportunity to take back our Supreme Court, to add seats to restore balance and legitimacy, to think about term limits, to take out the politicization. Another thing we haven't talked about is ethics reform. The Supreme Court of the United States is the only court in the country not bound by a code of ethics. These things are all possible. And so I hope everybody watching here will go to reformscotus.org, Reform SCOTUS, SCOTUS, for those who are not sort of hip to the abbreviation for Supreme Court of the United States. Reformscotus.org, we have a tool. Click it, email your senators, email your representatives, tell them that you want to add seats. Call your senators, call your congressmen and tell them we need to restore balance. This is a pivotal, exciting, big moment. And I'm so happy to be here with you, Senator Markey and Mondaire Jones. Like, we're going to build this movement and it's already starting to take back our court. And so I want people to come away with a sense of hope, a sense of action, and let's start this fight.
And I'm with you, Chris. The night that, that all this started, I put out a tweet just saying, we've got to repeal the filibuster and expand the court. And I'll be honest with you, there were Democrats who were attacking me on the first day. But once we get past this election, and once they start the hearing to repeal the Affordable Care Act with Amy Coney Barrett, I think a light bulb's going to go off over a lot of people's heads, and they're going to see that 2 generations of work is now going to be put in jeopardy because these courts are absolutely radically conservative in their interpretation of the Constitution. And we have leaders tonight joining us, everybody. And thank you, Chris. You demand justice is at the cutting edge. Mondaire, the minute he hits the floor of the Congress, he's going to be a big star. And you, Shantae, and Sunrise, you've been the army that has arrived here. There's just absolutely energizing older generations. That's what's happened because of all of your activism. And to everybody out there watching this evening, make sure you vote. This thing can be very close. You heard it from Monday. You heard it from Chris. You don't know what decisions the Supreme Court's going to make in what state about what ballots can be counted. So let's just make sure that between now and Tuesday night at 8 o'clock, we get as many in there as we can. The fate of the planet is riding on it, as Shantae would say, but the fate of every right, every privilege that we've put on the books over the last 2 generations is also in jeopardy. So thank you all so much. Thanks for joining us. Everybody out there, make sure you vote. Make sure your friends vote. Make sure your mother and father have voted. Make sure every person you know votes between now and Tuesday. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you. Take care.
Ed Markey's desk was thrown out in the hall by the State House bosses because Markey fought to make judges work full-time. Markey's bill is now the law. Ed Markey's desk was thrown out in the hall. Ed Markey's desk.
I'm Ed Markey. Fairer taxes, more jobs, better health care. Better health care. More jobs. Fairer taxes. I'm Ed Markey. Tired of watching people suffer while politicians make their backroom deals. Make their backroom deals. The bosses may tell me where to sit. No one tells me where to stand. No one tells me where to stand. No one tells me where to stand. I'm Ed Markey. No one tells me where to stand.
Markey's bill is now the law.
I'm tired of watching people suffer.
Markey's bill is now the law.
I'm running for Congress because I want to fight for the principles that I believe in. Fairer taxes, more jobs, better health care.
Markey's bill is now the law. Ed Markey's desk was thrown out in the hall by the